The maintenance tunnels were a maze of cramped passages and sudden drops, designed for maintenance drones and the occasional human engineer. Russo crawled through spaces barely wide enough for his shoulders. His hands and knees scraped raw on the rough-cut stone. The sounds from above were muffled here, but he could still hear them, the wet, organic sounds of transformation, the screams that were no longer quite human. He'd been descending for 20 minutes when he found the first sign of the research wing. A service hatch marked with the Artemis Biosynth logo. The stylized double helix, rendered in brushed titanium, looked obscene in this place. Beautiful corporate aesthetics covering something rotten. The hatch was locked, but the mechanism was mechanical, a simple deadbolt, not electronic. Russo wedged his dinner tray into the gap and levered until the bolt snapped. The hatch swung open into darkness. He dropped through. The room beyond was a laboratory. Sterile white walls, examination tables, equipment he couldn't identify but whose purpose he could guess. Restraints built into the tables, drainage gutters along the floor, sealed viewing ports in one wall. This was where they'd done it, where Artemis had transformed prisoners into experiments. Russo found a computer terminal still active. The screen showed video feeds from throughout the prison. Most were static or showed empty corridors, but one feed made him stop. It was the prisoner mess hall, or what had been the mess hall. Now it was a garden. That was the only word that fit. The infected had gathered there, dozens of them, and they were changing. Not in the violent, rapid way Torres had changed, but slowly, deliberately. Their bodies were fusing together, flesh flowing into flesh, creating structures. Walls, pillars, arches. They were building something from their own substance, and the result was simultaneously beautiful and horrifying. One figure stood apart from the mass, a woman or what had been a woman. Her transformation had taken a different path. Instead of becoming a predator, she'd become something else. Her arms had split and spread into wings, not like a bird's, but like a bat's. The skin stretched between elongated finger bones. Her face had retained more humanity than the others, though her eyes were solid black and her mouth had sealed shut, her jaw fusing into a smooth curve. She was directing the others. Russo could see it in the way they moved in response to her gestures, the way the structure grew according to some plan only she could see. This wasn't mindless infection. This was purpose, intelligence. Beautiful, isn't it? Russo spun. A woman stood in the doorway, late 50s, dark skin, gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a white lab coat stained with fluids Russo didn't want to identify. Her ID badge identified her as Dr. Lena Okoye, senior researcher, Artemis Biosynth. You're surprised the infected can think? Okoye continued, moving to the terminal. She pulled up additional feeds showing more of the transformed throughout the prison. Everyone is. They expect zombies, shambling corpses. But the corruption doesn't destroy intelligence. It enhances it, transforms it, gives it new forms of expression. You did this. Russo's voice was flat. You created this. I helped, under orders. Artemis wanted a biological weapon that could adapt to any environment, any threat. Self-replicating, self-improving. We used prisoners as test subjects, exposed them to the base corruption strain, monitored the results, refined the formula. She gestured at the screens. This is the latest version, Strain Omega. It doesn't just transform individuals, it creates hive minds. Collective intelligence emerging from transformed flesh. You're insane. I'm a scientist. There's a difference. Okoye turned to face him fully. Do you know why you're here, Mr. Kellerman? Why you were convicted of a crime you didn't commit? Russo said nothing. Because you worked for Helix Corporation, Artemis's biggest competitor in the biotech sector, and you were getting too close to our research. Your neural interface designs, your work on brain-computer integration, it would have allowed Helix to detect and counter the corruption's effects on human consciousness. So Artemis arranged for your arrest, framed you, sent you here. She smiled. You were supposed to be infected weeks ago, but the guards kept you in general population instead of the research wing. Paperwork error. Lucky you. Lucky, Russo repeated, his hands curled into fists. Tell that to Torres. To Vas, to everyone dead up there. Oh, they're not dead. That's the beautiful part. The corruption doesn't kill, transforms. All that biomass, all that consciousness, it's still there, just reorganized. The woman you saw on the screen, the one with wings, that's Director Kane. She ran this facility. Now she's becoming something greater. Queen, perhaps, a goddess. The corruption finds what's inside people and makes it manifest. Russo's mind was racing. Neural interface designs, brain-computer integration. His work at Helix had focused on allowing the human brain to interface directly with computer systems, bypassing traditional input devices. If the corruption affected consciousness, enhanced intelligence, created hive minds, "You wanted my research," he said slowly. "You wanted to merge it with the corruption, to create infected who could interface with computer systems, who could control machines with their minds." Okoye's smile widened. "Very good. Yes. Imagine it, bioweapons that can hack security systems, pilot ships, access databases. The corruption gives them the biological adaptability. Your research would give them digital access, the perfect weapon. I'll never help you. You won't have to. We already have the research. We accessed your neural implant while you slept." She tapped her temple. "Every prisoner gets one for medical monitoring. You didn't know yours was modified. It's been recording your thoughts, your memories, your dreams. Everything you know about neural interfaces is already in our databases." Horror washed over Russo. His hand went to the back of his neck, where he could feel the small bump of the implant. They'd been inside his head, stealing his thoughts. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "Because you're about to become patient zero for the next phase." Okoye pulled a syringe from her coat. The fluid inside was opalescent, shifting colors like oil on water. Strain Omega Plus, specifically designed to integrate with neural implant technology. You'll be the first of a new generation, the bridge between flesh and machine. She lunged. Russo grabbed a piece of lab equipment, some kind of electronic probe, and swung it at her head. She dodged, faster than a woman her age should move, and the syringe darted toward his neck. He caught her wrist. She was strong, too strong, and when their skin touched, he felt it. The corruption. She was already infected. Her flesh pulsed under his grip, the skin rippling as something moved beneath. "I took it voluntarily," she hissed. "A low dose, controlled, just enough to enhance cognition, reflexes, the benefits without the transformation. But you'll get the full treatment." Russo drove his knee into her stomach. She folded, gasping, and the syringe fell from her grip. It shattered on the floor, the opalescent fluid spreading across the tiles. Where it touched metal, the metal began to corrode. Where it touched plastic, the plastic began to grow. Okoye laughed even as she lay on the ground. "It's already loose. You breathed it in when the syringe broke. The airborne version is slower, but just as effective. In a few hours, you'll start to feel it. The warmth, the changes, your flesh becoming something more." Russo ran. He burst from the laboratory into a corridor lined with holding cells. Most were empty, their transparent walls smeared with fluids, but some still held occupants. Prisoners in various stages of transformation, their bodies twisting and changing behind the reinforced glass. They watched him pass with eyes that held too much intelligence. One prisoner had transformed into something plant-like, his body extending tendrils that pressed against the glass, seeking escape. Another had multiplied. Russo counted 8 faces in the mass of flesh behind the glass, each one distinct, each one screaming silently. Movement behind him. Russo spun, the Helios 7 coming up instinctively. Dr. Okoye stood in the laboratory doorway, but she'd changed since he'd left her on the floor. The low-dose corruption she'd taken was progressing rapidly now, accelerated by stress or pain. Her arms had split at the elbows, each limb now ending in 2 hands. Her neck had elongated, giving her head an unsettling mobility. And her eyes were solid black, pupil and iris merged into pools of darkness. "You're wasting time," she said. her voice harmonizing with itself as if multiple vocal cords spoke in unison. The airborne strain is in your lungs, in your blood. Fighting is pointless. Maybe, Russo said, but I'm good at pointless. He fired. The plasma bolt took her in the chest, burning through her lab coat, her skin, the muscle beneath. But instead of blood, what poured from the wound was that opalescent fluid, the corruption in its purest form. It flowed down her body like oil, and where it dripped onto the floor, the metal began to corrode and grow. Okoye looked down at the wound, then back at Russo. She smiled. You can't kill me. Not anymore. I'm beyond death, beyond pain. I'm becoming. She lunged with speed that shouldn't be possible for a human body. Russo fired again, hit her in the shoulder. She spun from the impact but kept coming, her multiple hands reaching for him. He ran. The corridor branched ahead, left toward the elevator shaft, right toward what his mental map suggested was a storage area. Russo went right, shouldering through a maintenance door into a chamber filled with equipment lockers and supply crates. He slammed the door behind him and looked for something to barricade it. Found nothing. The door had no lock, no way to seal it. Behind him, Okoye's footsteps echoed in the corridor. Multiple footsteps. She wasn't alone anymore. Russo checked his power cell. 2 shots left. He had 1 spare cell in his pocket. 10 shots total. He moved deeper into the storage area, looking for an exit, a weapon, anything. Found a locker marked emergency equipment and wrenched it open. Inside, 2 more Helios 7 power cells, a first aid kit, and a handheld welding torch. The torch gave him an idea. When the door opened and Okoye entered, followed by 2 infected guards whose bodies had fused partially together at the shoulder, creating a 2-headed monstrosity, Russo was ready. He'd punctured 3 oxygen canisters and propped them near the door. When the infected crossed the threshold, he fired the plasma pistol at the canisters. The explosion was smaller than Voss's grenade, but just as effective in the confined space. Superheated gas and shrapnel tore through the infected, shredding Okoye's transformed body, separating the fused guards into component pieces. The blast threw Russo backward into a stack of crates, and for a moment, the world was ringing silence and smoke. When his hearing returned, he heard them moving, still alive, still coming, because of course they were. Russo grabbed his salvage supplies and ran for the elevator shaft. The control panel was dead, but Russo could see the maintenance ladder inside the shaft. He forced the doors open and started climbing. The shaft was dark, lit only by emergency lights that cast everything in sickly green. Russo climbed past floor after floor, his arms burning, his breath coming in gasps. Behind and below, he could hear sounds echoing up the shaft. Wet sounds, growing sounds. He reached what should have been the ground level, the prison's main corridor. But when he forced the doors open, he found himself in a nightmare. The infection had spread here. The walls were no longer metal and concrete, but something organic. Flesh stretched between structural supports like webbing, pulsing with internal fluids. Bones, human bones, had been incorporated into the structure, serving as supports and rafters. The floor was soft, yielding, warm to the touch. The prison was becoming a living thing. Russo stumbled forward, trying not to think about what he was walking on. Ahead, he could see a gathering, infected prisoners arranged in concentric circles around a central figure. The woman with wings, Director Kane. She'd grown since he'd seen her on the video feed. Her wings now spanned the entire corridor, the membrane pulsing with visible veins. Her body had elongated, become more graceful, almost angelic if angels were made of meat and bone and transformation. She saw him. Her mouth was sealed, but he heard her voice anyway. Not in his ears, but in his mind. A telepathic whisper that felt like fingers brushing across his brain. "Brother," she said, "you're changing. I can smell it. The corruption is already in your blood. Soon you'll join us. Soon you'll understand." "I'll die first," Russo said. "Death is a transformation. Life is a transformation. Everything is transformation. That's what we've learned. The corruption doesn't destroy, it reveals. It shows what we really are beneath the meat." I was a prison director. Now I'm a queen. You were a scientist. What will you become? The infected around her began to move, closing in. Russo looked for escape routes and found none. The flesh walls had closed behind him. The only way out was through. One of the infected lunged. A guard whose transformation had turned him into something insectoid. His body covered in chitinous plates, his hands ending in curved blades. Russo dodged, grabbed a piece of bone protruding from the wall, and snapped it free. It was sharp, the marrow still wet inside. He drove it into the insect guard's eye. The creature screamed and recoiled, black fluid spraying from the wound. But others were coming. A prisoner whose legs had fused into a tail, who moved by pulling herself forward with arms that had multiplied into a dozen grasping limbs. A guard whose entire torso had opened like a flower, revealing a mouth ringed with teeth and a tongue that split into 3 writhing tentacles. Russo fought. He stabbed and kicked and screamed, his bone weapon breaking, his hands slick with fluids that burned where they touched his skin. He was losing. There were too many. Then the wall exploded. Plasma fire tore through the organic structure, superheating the flesh, turning moisture to steam. A figure stepped through the smoke, a security guard, his armor scorched but intact, a plasma rifle in his hands. "Move!" the guard shouted. Russo moved. He ran toward the guard, toward the opening in the wall, as plasma rounds burned the air behind him. The infected screamed and surged forward, but the guard kept firing, kept burning, creating a corridor of death. They burst through into a maintenance tunnel, actual metal and stone, blessedly inorganic. The guard sealed the blast door behind them, cutting off the sounds of pursuit. "Thanks," Russo gasped. "I thought." The guard removed his helmet. It wasn't a guard. It was Torres, but not the Torres who'd transformed in the cell. This Torres looked almost normal, his face untwisted, his eyes clear. But when he smiled, Russo saw the teeth had changed. Sharper, more numerous. "Hello, old friend," Torres said. His voice was his own, but underneath it was that harmonic thrum that made Russo's teeth ache. "I was hoping I'd find you. We have so much to talk about." To be continued.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.